My boss took $50,000 that belonged to me, and when I finally put the proof on the table in front of him, I watched the color leave his face before he said a single word. That moment came 4 months after he stood in front of our whole team and promised me that bonus pool with a smile on his face. My name is Rachel Whitfield, I am 29 years old, and I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized logistics company just outside Chicago. I am the person who reconciles vendor invoices for a living, which means I notice when numbers do not add up before anyone else in the building does. Most people in my office think that makes me boring. It does not. It makes me the last person you want to lie to on paper. I did not know any of that would matter the week my manager, Craig Donnelly, called me into his office to tell me about the bonus. He had that easy practice warmth he used whenever he wanted something to sound bigger than it was. He told me the $50,000 pool was tied directly to the vendor consolidation project I had led for 6 months, the one that saved the company real money. He said my name twice in that meeting like he wanted me to remember it, and I did. I drove home that night thinking this was going to be the easiest money I had ever earned in my career. I had done the work. The numbers were clean. There was nothing left to argue about. I was wrong about almost everything except the numbers. 2 weeks later, in a staff meeting with 12 people in the room, Craig stood at the whiteboard and told everyone he would personally handle the bonus calculations himself, just to save me the hassle since I was already stretched thin. Nobody blinked. It sounded generous. I even thanked him. I had no idea that sentence was the first move in something much bigger, and I would not understand what it really meant until I was staring at a printed invoice that changed everything. The first payout notifications went out on a Friday. I remember because our HR system, Workday, sends an automatic email the second a bonus hits your paycheck, and by 10 in the morning 3 people on my team had already screenshotted theirs into our group Slack channel with celebration emojis. I did not have an email. I told myself it was a processing delay. Payroll runs in batches, I reasoned, and mine would probably clear by Monday. Monday came and went. So did the following Friday. I messaged Craig directly, kept it short and professional the way you are trained to in corporate America when you do not want to seem difficult. I asked if there was an estimated timeline for the remaining payouts. He responded 4 hours later with one line. Finance is still reviewing the final numbers. Should have an update soon. I read that message maybe 6 times, trying to figure out if there was something else hidden in it. There was not. It was just vague enough to end the conversation without answering it. A week after that, I asked him in person, standing by the break room where the good coffee machine was, the one that always drew a small crowd around 3 in the afternoon. He barely looked up from his phone. He told me finance flagged some discrepancies in the vendor savings calculations, and they needed extra time to confirm the final pool amount. I asked which discrepancies. He said he would loop me in once he had more detail. He never did. I want to be honest about something here. Part of me wondered if I was making too much of it. Payroll glitches happen. I had seen them happen to other people before, and I told myself more than once that week that I was probably reading tension into something that was just bureaucratic slowness. I almost let it go completely. I almost did not send the next email. By the 3rd week, 2 more coworkers had received their portions. I sat at my desk that Thursday afternoon and watched Dana from procurement post a photo of a paid-off credit card statement in the group chat with 3 fire emojis under it, and I felt something tighten behind my ribs that I did not have a name for yet. I was not angry. Not exactly. I was doing math. The kind nobody notices until the total comes out wrong. Then came the all-hands meeting at the end of the month. Craig stood in front of the department, 40-some people in folding chairs and a few more on a video call screen mounted at the front, and he thanked leadership publicly for what he called their generosity this quarter. He mentioned the vendor consolidation project by name. He described the strategy, the negotiation approach, the 6-month timeline. He did not say my name once. Somebody 2 rows behind me leaned toward their coworker and whispered, "Wait, didn't Rachel run that project?" I heard it. I am almost certain Craig heard it too, because his eyes flicked toward me for exactly 1 second before he moved on to the next slide. I sat through the rest of that meeting with my hands folded in my lap, nodding at the appropriate moments, taking notes I would never read again. Inside I was rebuilding a timeline. Announcement. Reassignment. Partial payouts to everyone but me. Public credit given to leadership instead of the person who actually did the work. One small deniable choice at a time. That is how it always starts. I went home that night and did something I had never done before in 4 years at that company. I opened a blank folder on my personal laptop, not my work one, and I named it nothing. Just a string of letters that meant nothing to anyone but me. I did not know yet what I was going to put in it. I just knew I needed somewhere private to start putting things. I decided to do things the correct way first. I wrote a factual email to Craig requesting a full breakdown of the bonus pool calculation, and I copied our HR business partner, a woman named Denise Okafor, because in an at-will employment state like Illinois, verbal promises disappear the moment they become inconvenient. Documentation is not paranoia. It is just how you survive in a building where your manager controls the story. Craig responded 2 days later, and this time the tone had changed. He said that after finance completed their final review, the actual bonus pool came in smaller than originally projected, due to unexpected costs elsewhere in the budget. $50,000 had apparently shrunk, though he never gave me an updated number. Denise replied to the thread with a single line thanking us both for the update and closing the loop. No questions asked, no requests for supporting documentation. I stared at that email for a long time. Nobody had asked to see a single number. That was the moment something in the office shifted. And I felt it before I could explain it. A coworker I used to eat lunch with started taking calls out on the loading dock instead of the break room. Another one stopped tagging me in project threads I used to be included on automatically. I found out later, through someone who still liked me enough to tell me the truth, that Craig had mentioned in a smaller meeting that I was, in his words, having a hard time letting things go lately. He never said I was wrong. He just made sure enough people heard the word difficult attached to my name before I ever got the chance to explain myself. The worst of it landed on a Tuesday morning, in a kickoff meeting for the next vendor optimization project, the natural follow-up to the one I had already led successfully. I walked into the conference room 5 minutes early like I always do, and there was no chair set up for me at the table. Craig had already assigned the lead role to someone 2 levels below me in experience, a guy named Tyler Brennan who had been with the company 11 months. Tyler would not look at me. He knew. I could tell by the way he kept his eyes on his laptop the entire meeting. When I asked Craig about it afterward quietly in the hallway, he told me he needed someone who could handle pressure more consistently right now, and that this was not personal, just about protecting the timeline. 2 people from that meeting walked past us in the hallway while he said it. I am fairly certain that was not an accident either. I did not argue. I said, "Understood. Thank you for letting me know." And I walked back to my desk and sat down and opened my laptop and stared at the screen for probably 10 full minutes without typing anything. Then I opened that unnamed folder from a few weeks earlier, and I started adding things to it. Screenshots of the Slack messages showing other people's payouts. A copy of my original email requesting the breakdown. A copy of Craig's vague response. The meeting invite that showed I had been the listed project lead for 6 months before Tyler's name replaced mine 3 days after the kickoff meeting I was excluded from. I was not building a complaint yet. I did not know what I was building. I just knew that every time someone tries to make you feel small enough to stay quiet, the smartest thing you can do is start writing everything down. A week later I was pulled into an unrelated audit, a routine quarterly review of vendor consulting fees across 3 departments, the kind of assignment that usually goes to whoever has the least on their plate, which apparently was me now that I had been quietly sidelined from anything interesting. I opened the spreadsheet, started reconciling line items against invoices the way I had done 1,000 times before. One invoice caught my eye, not because of the amount but because of the formatting. The consulting fee description used a strange abbreviation style, a specific way of shortening vendor codes that I had only ever seen in one other place, months earlier, when I briefly covered expense report processing for our department during someone's parental leave. The vendor name on the invoice was Meridian Grove Consulting, a name I did not recognize from any project I had worked on. I remembered the formatting because it was unusual enough to be memorable, the kind of small habit a specific person develops and never thinks twice about changing. I did not say anything to anyone. I took a screenshot and saved it into that same unnamed folder without a note. I told myself it was probably nothing. I closed the spreadsheet and moved on to the next line item like it was any other Tuesday. It was not, and I would understand exactly why 2 days later, when Craig asked me to come into his office and the tone of everything changed. Craig asked me to come into his office at 4 in the afternoon, which in my experience is never a good time for a meeting request. I sat down across from him. He had a folder already sitting on the desk between us, closed, edges lined up perfectly straight the way people arrange things when they want to look composed. He slid it toward me without opening it himself first. It was a performance improvement plan. He used words like attitude and team fit and difficulty adapting to feedback. There were no specific examples in it, nothing I could point to and dispute directly, just a vague, carefully worded document that would look reasonable to anyone who had not lived through the last 6 weeks of my life. He told me this was the first step in a formal process, and that in an at-will state, the company had a lot of flexibility in how these situations eventually got resolved. Then he said, almost gently, "You do not want to make this harder than it needs to be." For a second, just a second, I felt the old instinct rise up in me, the one that wanted to apologize for something I had not done, the one that wanted to smooth this over the way I had smoothed over 100 small things before. I have never liked confrontation. I sat with that instinct, let it pass through me, and did not act on it. I looked at the folder for a long moment. I did not open it. I asked him one question. I asked him who specifically reviewed and approved the final bonus pool calculation before it was reduced. His jaw shifted just slightly, the kind of movement you would miss if you were not already looking for it. He said finance handled that internally and it was not really relevant to the conversation we were having right now. I noticed something else too. Something I had not let myself notice before. There was a stack of unopened mail on the corner of his desk, 3 envelopes deep, the top one stamped past due in red block letters from a company I did not recognize. I did not mention it. I filed it away the same way I file every detail that does not add up. I said, "Of course, thank you for clarifying," and I picked up the folder and told him I would review it and respond within the standard time frame. I stood up, walked out of his office, and did not let my expression change until I was back at my own desk with the door of the small file room shut behind me. Then, alone, I let my hands shake for exactly 30 seconds before I made them stop. The next morning, I requested a private meeting with Denise from HR, separate from anything related to the performance improvement plan. I told her I wanted to walk her through something I had noticed during the vendor consulting audit. She agreed to meet that afternoon in a small conference room near her office, the kind with frosted glass walls and a whiteboard nobody ever used. I started with the invoices laid out in order one at a time. I showed her the formatting pattern. I showed her the vendor code abbreviation style. I told her the vendor name, Meridian Grove Consulting, and explained that when I searched the state business registry the night before, out of simple curiosity, the registered agent listed was not a company at all. It was a residential address. I had written it down and cross-referenced it against our employee records out of nothing more than habit. It matched the address on file for Craig Donnelly. Denise stopped writing. She looked up at me, and her expression moved from polite attentiveness into something much more careful. I did not say the word embezzlement. I did not need to. I laid the documents on the table in order, and let the dates and the invoice numbers do the talking. The consulting fees traced back to the same budget line that had funded our team's bonus pool, the same $50,000 that had shrunk to nothing the moment I asked too many questions about it. Denise asked me one question before she said anything else. She asked if I had shared this with anyone besides her. I told her no, not yet. She closed her notebook and told me she needed to loop in legal and compliance immediately, and that I should not discuss this with Craig or anyone on the team until she followed up with me directly. I stood up, thanked her, and walked out of that conference room. For the first time in 6 weeks, I felt something other than dread sitting in my chest. 2 days later, I was called into a meeting with Denise, someone from legal named Patricia Alvarez, and a compliance officer sitting quietly at the end of the table with a laptop open. They asked me to walk through the timeline one more time on the record for a formal written statement. I answered every question calmly with documentation ready for each one. What I did not expect was what happened 40 minutes later. Patricia asked if I would be willing to be present when they confronted Craig with the findings, since I was the one who had identified the discrepancy and could speak to the technical details if questions came up. I said yes before I had time to think about whether I actually wanted to. Craig walked into that same conference room 20 minutes later, expecting, I think, another conversation about my performance improvement plan. Instead, he found Patricia, Denise, a compliance officer, and me, sitting with a folder of my own now open on the table in front of me. Patricia laid out the invoices from Meridian Grove Consulting, one at a time, the same way I had laid them out for Denise 2 days earlier. She read the registered address out loud. She asked him to explain the connection. Craig looked at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. I watched his hands, resting on the edge of the table, start to tremble slightly before he had said a single word in his own defense. He tried to explain that Meridian Grove was a legitimate outside consultant, that the address was a clerical error, that he could produce a contract if given time. Patricia asked him to produce it right then. He could not. His voice climbed for a moment, then dropped almost to nothing, and he said something about needing to speak with an attorney before answering anything further. Nobody in the room said a word. Denise closed her folder. Security was called before I left the building that evening. Craig did not come back to his desk. My performance improvement plan was formally withdrawn that same day, in writing, with an apology from HR for what they now acknowledged was an inappropriate escalation given the surrounding circumstances. My original bonus, plus the full amount owed with back pay calculated to the original announcement date, was approved and processed within the week. I did not celebrate in the office. I sat at my desk, closed my laptop at exactly 5 o'clock, and drove home in complete silence, the same way I had driven home the night Craig first promised me that money 4 months earlier. This time the silence felt different. Felt like mine. The investigation did not stop with the bonus pool. Once compliance started pulling threads, they found other discrepancies in expense reports going back over a year, smaller amounts here and there that nobody had questioned because nobody had reason to look. Because the performance improvement plan had been issued so soon after I raised concerns about the missing bonus, our legal team flagged it internally as a potential retaliation issue. The kind of pattern that draws serious attention if it ever reaches something like an EEOC complaint. I never filed one. I never needed to. The company handled it quietly, and I was asked to sign a written statement for my own file confirming the timeline, in case it was ever needed later. About 3 weeks later, I was offered Craig's position on an interim basis, while they searched externally for a permanent replacement. I sat with that offer for 2 full days before I turned it down. I told my director I would rather take a lateral move to a different team, one led by someone I had worked with before and genuinely trusted. I did not want the corner office that came from someone else's downfall. One afternoon, Dana from procurement, the same coworker who had posted her paid-off credit card statement in the group chat months earlier, stopped by my new desk. She told me she was sorry for pulling away during those weeks, that she had believed the version of the story Craig had quietly spread around the office. I told her I understood. I meant it. People believe what they are shown, and for a long time I was the only one who could see the full picture. I think about that first conversation with Craig sometimes, the one where he told me this bonus would be the easiest money I ever earned. In a strange way, he was right, just not in the way either of us expected that day. It was not easy because it happened quickly. It was easy because I already knew how to read numbers that did not add up, and I was willing to keep looking even when part of me wanted to let it go. I did not win that situation by being the loudest person in the room. I won it by writing everything down, by asking one question at exactly the right moment, and by trusting that the truth, once it is fully documented, speaks for itself. If you have ever been the person quietly building a case nobody else could see yet, I would love to know in the comments, would you have stayed as patient as I did? Or would you have said something sooner? If this story meant something to you, subscribe because there are more stories like this one still to come.